Hi, the topic of this video is Peyote Stitch. So I'm going to show you the very basics, how to thread your needle, the difference between the seed beads and the cylinder beads, and then I'm going to show you the technique. So here we go. So first of all, you need to make a clean cut on the end of your thread. And if you pinch the thread between your finger and thumb and place the eye of the needle over where you know that thread to be, and then just relax your finger and thumb. There's no pushing involved, it just magically goes in all by itself. If you struggle, turn your needle over because the eye is wider on one side than it is on the other. Before we start, I want to show you the difference between a seed bead and a cylinder bead. So this is a cylinder bead and it's straight from top to bottom. The seed beads have got bezeled edges, so they're a little bit rounder on the edges. So if I put two side by side, they don't touch at the ends. If I put two cylinder beads next to each other, they touch from top to bottom. So they sit very close together and very uniform, and the seed beads give a kind of bumpy surface. So that's the difference between your seed beads and your cylinder beads. And we're going to start our peyote, and we are going to use cylinder beads, but first of all we're going to use a stopper bead. And what I mean by that is that it stops your beads falling off the end of your thread, especially if you're a beginner. So you just go through your bead once, generally is enough. I'm going to go through twice because I'm using thick thread and these beads have got very large holes. I've got thick thread here. When you use the ordinary beading thread, you will find when you pull it off the reel, it's got lots of kinks in it. So you need to give it a good stretch to remove those kinks. Otherwise you'll get tangled up and it will knot. Once you've done that, then you need to pick up the number of beads that you want for the width of your project. So I'm going to use alternate colours so that you can see the process clearly. And then you slide those down to the stopper bead. For the first bit I'm going to show you on the mat without holding the beadwork. Normally I would hold the beadwork to keep control, but I want you to be able to see the process clearly. So we pick up another bead and then we miss the first one and we go through the second one back towards the tail. And sometimes you need to coax that first one just to roll over. Doesn't always want to. And then we're going to pick up another one and we're going to miss the next one and go through the next one. So the mantra for Peyote Stitch is pick up one, miss one, pass through the next one. So same again, we've picked one up, we're missing one and we're passing through one. So now we have pairs and single beads along the row. To count your rows, if you count the beads on each outside edge, you will get the total of number of rows that you have stitched. And here, if you count on the diagonal, you get the same number. Now I know we've only stitched one row, but it's actually turned into 3 rows. So from here on in, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to hold it. So I hold it along my finger and I put the thread over that first finger and I clamp it down with my second finger so that I've got total control. Now I'm going to pick up the green and we're just basically going to fill the gaps. So you pick up one, you miss the one in the dip and you pass through the next one. Thread over the finger, pick up one, miss the one in the dip, pass through the next one. And again, pass through the next one. And then you simply turn it over and do it all again. You can work from right to left, left to right, but it does affect your tension. And the other thing that I would like to make quite clear to folk is that when you go through your bead, don't pull the thread up like so. It creates a gap, and as you're pulling that thread against the edge of the bead, it's eventually going to shred your thread. And the other thing is you must keep control of this thread. If you don't, when you go through your bead, look, you get gaps there too. So make sure that you're holding on to that thread, otherwise you get in a bit of a mess. If it does all come loose, just give a tweak on the end bead and pull it through and you're fine. So remember, always take the thread through in line with the hole and then you're not going to shred your thread. You can move your hands if you want to. If you want to pull in that direction, then just turn your hand and you can pull it forward. But try not to grate along the edge of the beads. and then you'll get a nice even tension. You won't shred your thread, and away you go. So once you've done that first row and you've got that set in place, all you're doing is fill in the gaps. And that's how to do peyote stitch. I promised that I would show you some tips and tricks. If you get yourself to a point where you have 6 rows, you can then turn your piece of peyote stitch into a 3-dimensional tube. And as you can see here, you can remove the stopper bead once you've got a couple of rows done. You don't need it anymore. On this piece, I've got a low bead here and a high bead here. So if I roll that over, that high bead is going to fit into that gap. So all those lilac ones are going to fill the gap between the lemon ones. So if I come back along the row from one side to the other, so I'm going through all the high beads, right across the row. When you get to the last one, you're not connected at the end, so you need to come back from the outside towards your beadwork to complete that connection. And then you've got a little tube which you can use as a beaded bead. And not only now can you make flat pieces of peyote, you can also make beaded beads. So reading a peyote chart can be a bit of a challenge. I would suggest that you photocopy and enlarge your pattern first, and then we'll come to another little trick later. Here we've got a chart that is already coloured in, and we're going to just go with this one because it's got just a few beads on. So you pick up all of the beads that you can see on the bottom row, and because the beads are offset, when you come back along the next row, you're picking what looks like every alternate bead, and so on into the next row. It will be the next alternate bead. Some people will use a post-it note to just cover the beads that they've already worked, which means that you're seeing half of the bead you've already worked and the entire bead that you're about to work. And this can be a bit hard on the eyes. So the alternative, if you have the patience, is to copy your chart again and then cut around the shape of the beads. And then when you put that against your graph paper, you can see that you can cover up the bead you've already worked, and all you see is the entire bead that you're going to work. Makes it much, much easier to read. So that's how to read your pattern. And then finally, I just want to show you what your peyote stitch technique should look like. So this is a piece using the cylinder beads. You're aiming for no gaps between your beads. You don't want to see fresh air and you don't want to see threads, and it should be quite drapey. So away you go, enjoy your beading.